Welcome to the All Together Show with Eric Satz. On this show, you'll hear Eric's unfiltered interviews with interesting and untraditional entrepreneurs who ignored boundaries, followed their instincts and own paths, and are now empowering others to do the same. Subscribe to the show and learn more by visiting alltogether.show. And now, your host, Eric Satz.
This week's guest is Ryan Caldbeck, founder of Circle Up, where he served as CEO for 9 years before handing over day-to-day responsibilities and stepping up to the chairman role. I always admired Ryan's willingness to write publicly about the physical and mental challenges of raising money, dealing with investors, building a team, and managing expectations, most importantly his own and those of his family. This was a podcast I looked forward to for quite some time, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
This episode of the All Together Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto is a digital, self-directed IRA company modernizing IRA investing. They make it easy and cost-effective for individual investors to access their retirement savings and invest in alternative assets. To learn more, visit altoira.com.
Ryan Caldbeck, welcome to the All Together Show, man. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
For folks who don't know, Ryan is the founder and former CEO of Circle Up. He's also the first NCAA men's basketball champion we've had on the show. I don't know how it's taken so long to get a men's basketball champion onto the All Together Show, but he is the first. And he's a Scorpio. So he's direct and he's serious and he's determined and resilient and all those things. But what I'd really love to hear from him, and I think you all would too, is how Ryan describes himself in his own words.
Thanks again for having me. So I'm a father of three. I've been married for 9 years in July. Live in California, from Vermont originally. And my parents now moved down to Florida. For work, I most recently started a technology company called Circle Up. So I'm a technology entrepreneur. Before that, I was an investor. I'm someone who is extremely curious and loves to learn, loves to grow. I really like being surrounded by people who feel the same way, who are open-minded and like to see different perspectives of the world. That just gets me super excited and passionate about life, to be around other people who want to grow and learn other points of view. So that's a little bit about who I am.
Who do you get that from? More your mom or more your dad? Both?
That's really interesting. Probably in that case, more my dad, but maybe a little bit from both. I remember, I think my dad talking to me about, if I'm going to probably butcher it, but reading me a story about Abraham Lincoln and his passion for learning in every interaction and learning from other people. And I think I was maybe 12 or 13 at the time. And that concept of you're in a line for the school bus, you can learn something. You're in a conversation with an enemy at the age of 12, you can learn something. And when I learn, I feel alive. And that I saw my dad reading a tremendous amount. Now, he'll probably get 1,000 books from the library a year and read 30, 40, but he will read. He reads a lot. And I loved his passion for learning.
So what role did growing up in Burlington play for you in terms of who you think you've become and character building and determination and resiliency?
So I grew up in Shelburne. I was born in Burlington, which is where the hospital is. But Shelburne when I was there, it was a 2,000 or 3,000 person town. Now it's about 6 in about 15 minutes outside of Burlington, Vermont. I think Vermont and Shelburne shaped me in a lot of ways. Culturally, it is a group of people who I think by and large really have fantastic values and live there on purpose because they think that that's a path to happiness, not because the next unicorn is going to come out of there. It may, but that's not why they choose it. They choose it because happiness is their priority. There are a lot of lessons that I learned growing up. A couple that stick out for me. I saw a lot of people who were smarter than I was, or who got better grades than I did, who didn't try to pursue an education after high school. or didn't try to pursue it quite as much as they could have. And it was in part because the families that they were in sometimes didn't prioritize that. I remember the father of a close friend of mine saying, "Why would you go to college? You pay them for 4 years. You can just work for 4 years and they pay you." I remember a different close friend who got into Dartmouth, decided to say no, and went to a local school that most people haven't heard of. And because it was cheaper. This person had the money to do both, but just what's the value in paying more? And so that really hit home for me, just the importance of your family and what you get taught at home, and learning about priorities early on in life from home, not just from school. Another thing that really sticks out for me is like in every situation I am ever in, I still view myself as an underdog. And you kind of get a little bit of that in Vermont. And look, I'm 6'3" white guy in Atherton, California. Like there's harder beats in life for sure. But that mindset comes from growing up in a small town and a small state, and not being surrounded as we are in Palo Alto with, 100 Olympic athletes within 10 miles of you, right? Or 50 billionaires within 10 miles. There's something about that, the grittiness that comes from there that I still take. And I love that. I love that upbringing.
I want to pull on that happiness thread for a second, because you've been quoted as saying that one of the things that drives you is this desire to make an impact, whatever impact means. And you're also quoted as talking about when JetBlue came to Burlington and offered the people of Vermont the ability to fly to, let's just call them real cities for shorthand, kind of in an easy, direct, cost-effective manner. I think for a lot of people, they don't understand the value and the life-changing experience that happens for and this may be wrong, but largely rural community surrounding Burlington. But I grew up in Miami. I moved to New York, and then San Francisco, and then Nashville. Southwest changed Nashville. And so I understand your point about JetBlue moving into Burlington and the effect and the impact. But I'm curious as to why that was sort of the trigger for you, as opposed to Ben and Jerry's. What an impact Ben and Jerry's and happiness has had.
It's a fascinating question, because I also remember McDonald's moving into our town, or the city. I remember Walmart moving in. And the example that really sticks out is JetBlue. And I think it's because the impact that it had on people's lives, I would argue, is greater than and more transformative than where you buy your food or what food you buy in those other examples. For me, like, it unlocked the secret door, right? It like, and not just for me, but like seeing other people, like everyone now had this magical door to go into this other world, which was, and it's if you haven't grown up in that situation, it's really hard to wrap your head around. But like, I had more than a few friends who had never left the state, never left within 30 minutes. This is, I didn't grow up in the 40s here. I mean, I grew up, in the 80s and 90s. And now, even if they weren't taking that flight, now they could talk to people that were. And that's something that I really want to stress. Like, when you grow up in Palo Alto and you're surrounded by 100 Olympic athletes at Stanford or 50 billionaires, you begin to dream bigger because you're exposed to people who have been able to achieve bigger things. And when I grew up, the best basketball player in the state's history didn't play in the NBA, didn't win any championships, was someone you've never heard of. Well, it's hard to like dream about, I could go play at Duke or I could go play in them. You can't, there's no comparison point. Now when you can get on a plane and you can see that in person, whatever that is, if that is basketball or if that is swimming or that is finance, whatever it is, now you're exposed to something that allows you to dream. And books are amazing for that. And that's one of the things that my dad taught me. But being able to see people interact is a really special thing. Something I do with my daughter, I started this about 18 months ago. So my daughter is now 6, and we look for female heroes. A hero is someone that can have accomplished anything great in her eyes. Okay. And so it could be someone who did the Alaskan dog sled race, or an MIT scientist, or an Olympic swimmer, anything. And we try and call them and get on the phone, and Kate and my daughter ask
I like that,
for 10 or 15 minutes. And, the questions are pretty basic. Like, are we ever afraid of something? Do you ever fail? Like that kind of stuff. But what I'm trying to do there, and what really was effective for me when my parents tried to expose me to other people and other ways of life, is it just gets you to dream. Dream about accomplishing something amazing. And that is what JetBlue, in my opinion, did for me and for other people there. It was a $25 or $50 one-way flight to New York City. It allows you to dream about new possibilities.
I love that. And when I first read that, I'll admit to not sort of grasping the window that opened for everyone as a result of that, relative to, just the joy and impact of Ben and Jerry's. And so I totally understand that. What's harder, walking on to the Duke men's basketball team, or founding and running an early stage business?
Oh gosh, they're just really different experiences.
How about odds of success? I mean, there can't be a lot of walk-ons. At Duke.
No, yeah, there's not. They tend to. It's very rare when they don't recruit the person. So they'll recruit someone who could have gotten a scholarship at a mid-level D1 school, and then have them walk on, or they'll take something they've done a fair amount of is like, it's a soccer player who is also good at basketball, and so it's a carrot to give that person to come play soccer or football. We've had several football players. I don't know if I can frame it as like harder or easier. One of the things I love about sports that's not present in business is it's just very, for me, it was very clean in terms of whether or not you deserved it. I didn't play more because I didn't deserve it. And there wasn't a lot of ambiguity on that. No one needed to tell me that. You and I can just play one-on-one. You beat me 10 times out of 10. I'm not going to argue that I should play more. There's no cry of politics or it's unfair or luck. And in the case of business, and particularly starting a company, there's frankly a lot of luck. And there's a lot of skill. But I think there's a component of that. There's also so many different types of skills and things that have to go right to get something off the ground. In basketball, you have a very defined set of things you have to do well, and I can train for that. There's almost like a roadmap. I look up ahead and I see Eric's on the team. I want to model myself on what did he do to get there. In the case of starting something that's never existed in the history of the world, which we tried to do with Circle Up, like there's no roadmap for that. You're writing the roadmap. And so it's something that was an imagery that I had often when we started it, when my co-founder Rory Aiken and I started it. It felt like we were in a pitch black room with blindfolds on, trying to like find something, and you're just trying to figure it out, and there's no roadmap.
And I think that's a great analogy, by the way, or image. At what point? I mean, you were on a private equity investment track. At what point do you decide that's not for you and I need to go do this thing that's never been done before?
Maybe early 2011, I started having conversations with my then girlfriend, now wife, Kim, and I wasn't fulfilled. My job was amazing in private equity. Like, not to be crass, but I'm saying this to just conceptualize it. The money was awesome. I loved who I worked with. I worked less than 40 hours a week, and frankly, I was on ESPN.com 10 times a day. And I'm not saying this to be arrogant. I was pretty damn good at it. At the end of 2010, we have the ratings, and I was the highest rated investment professional at the firm for like the 5th year in a row. And I'm thinking to myself, like, it can't get better, but I'm still not happy. I'm not fulfilled. Like, I love who I work with, but I'm not happy. I'm making a lot of money, but I'm not happy. The hours are amazing. I'm not happy. And so what did it mean to not be happy? And I began to probe on that. And I kind of realized when I go hang out with my friends or my family, I never tell them what happened. If I just had the best thing that's ever happened to me at work happen last week, don't mention it at all. I'm not proud of it. It feels like I'm moving money from one pocket to another. I'm not building something. And that's not meant to criticize anyone in the job at all. It just didn't resonate for me in that role. Private equity is a bit different than venture, for the audience members who don't know, but private equity is much more about buying a mature business, and the thing is going to work. It's already working. And so you're not really adding a lot of value to that. Very different than I think in venture. So I just began to talk with my then girlfriend, about it. And Kim's brilliant. She was Harvard and Stanford MBA, and she kind of made up an exercise for me, which is she got some big Post-it notes, and she put them on the wall of my apartment. And every Saturday we just talk through what do you love, what do you not love. And so I've actually got them. I've kept them. So that's a decade ago now. And there are some silly things, if you look at the list, buffalo wings is on there, right? Because we're just really trying to free form, what do you love? What do you really love? And over several months of doing this exercise together and drilling down, well, why? Kind of the 5 whys, if anyone's familiar with that concept. Why do you love that? Why do you love that? What I discovered is I really love having an impact on other people. In basketball, as an example, it's funny we're talking about basketball. I never talk about it at work, but in basketball, I always loved an assist more than scoring myself. It's not altruism. It's just, I love it. I get goosebumps about the connection point between two humans when it's I don't need to think, we know what the other person's going to do. And when I'm in a friendship or a relationship with someone else where you can go back and forth like that, that's magic. That popcorn is magic to me. There's a connection point and an impact on one another that I love. I missed that in what I was doing. And I didn't feel like we were having enough impact on the companies. And so I thought well, how can I, on other people? And I just thought how can I have impact on the world around me? What can I do? And that led into, let's start something. Let's start something that we're proud of. And the image of JetBlue, and wouldn't it be an amazing thing to start that? Even if no one ever knows my name, to start something that has that kind of impact on other people. It's funny, at Stanford, I never took any entrepreneurship classes. My dad was the most risk-averse person that I knew. But I remember after a couple months of doing that work, I asked him, what do you think I should do? Should I stay at my private equity firm, or should I go start this? And he's super risk-averse. And he said, well, will you be more proud in 10 or 20 years if you could tell your kids that you started it and failed, or if you stayed in private equity and you succeeded? And I knew, that's it. I want to try. Yeah, I want to try. I want to put myself in the game. And if I'm not good enough, if not, doesn't work and I get cut, I want to try. I didn't want to be the person that said, well, I went to Duke and I didn't really want to try out, but I could have made it if I tried. I want to try. And putting yourself out there is frankly hard and embarrassing sometimes, but I tried.
It can definitely be embarrassing frequently, and it sure as hell is hard. So how did you decide that Circle Up was the thing that was going to provide the impact?
I was at it's a beauty conference, meaning there's entrepreneurs in the beauty space, personal care space, called HBA. And it was in New York. And I was on a panel about fundraising. And entrepreneurs for about an hour kept asking this panel, how do you raise money if you're a $5 million shampoo company? How do you raise money? What do you do? What do you do? For an hour, no one on the panel could answer the question. It was, hey, take out 2 credit cards. Try and get a short-term loan. But no one had a good answer, because in 2011, there were no options if you're a $5 million shampoo company. There's 5,000 options if you're a $5 million technology company, but none if you're a consumer products company. And so it just, by coincidence from that conference, I was on vacation. I flew to a vacation with my then girlfriend, Kim. And we kind of just, we're sitting on the beach for a week. And I'm just kind of staring up at the sky, thinking about okay, I think I want to start something. And there's some concept here, some problem to be solved. And I started just kicking around ideas. First of all, back up. reached out to Rory and reached out to him because I'd been friends with him for several years. And he's just, such a wonderful co-founder, which I can get into. And we started kicking around ideas on how to solve that problem. And Circle Up's what we came up with.
Have you had the impact you wanted to have?
That's a very loaded question for me. And it's loaded because...
Do you mind talking about it?
Yeah, no, I will. I appreciate it. First of all, thank you for asking if I'm okay talking about it. It's usually hard, in my experience, for other people to understand my mentality on this. And it's not a healthy mentality, and I'm not proud of it. But I also want to be honest. A quote in my high school yearbook, my quote in my high school yearbook, they asked for a quote. Mine was never be satisfied or you'll stop improving. It's a quote from a football coach, Tom Osborne. And it very much has reflected my approach to life. And frankly, I think that that's at times been a really helpful approach to push me to achieve more. And at other times, an extremely unhealthy approach. And an example of when it's unhealthy is the question you just asked. There's nothing that we could have achieved, or my answer to that would be yes. And because there's always something we didn't achieve. And I focus on that. I focus what else we could have done. Why couldn't have this thing have been bigger? What did I do? That's not a great path to happiness. Frankly, even if it drives the company or drives me forward, it's a difficult mentality to have to be happy. So, I think objectively, there are a lot of things that we've done that are great. And I think our investors, we just had a board call today. I think our investors would tell you that they're really excited about what we've built and where this is headed. And I also struggled to look you in the eyes and tell you, yeah, it's had the impact that I wanted. Because I never defined what that is. And so it's always more.
Always more is a problem. So I'm going to help you for a second. At least I think I'm going to help you for a second because, I started reading your tweet storms a while ago. And first of all, you're a great writer. You're a great thinker. And I think what's more important is that you share that writing and those thoughts. And from one founder to another, because you've written about some very hard subjects, mental health, depression, when's enough, how to prioritize. I can tell you that reading that someone else was experiencing a lot of the things that I was thinking myself was hugely helpful. And so I'm sure that you've received sort of many tweets in reply or emails in response. But I'd like to publicly say that you've had an impact on me. And I don't think I'm an N of one. I think I'm one of many. And so it may not be the impact you were looking for or hoping for, but you should know that you've made an impact. And I would argue a really important one. So,
thank you very much, Eric. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. So coming back to Circle Up, you did recently kind of step aside as CEO. You've become the chairman, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
You become the chairman.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. And, that's hard. That's like a little bit like putting your baby up for adoption. Not exactly. And you've shared this thinking as well, but I'd love to ask you to just walk the audience through that a little bit, because that's not an easy decision.
It was not an easy decision. The background is the first, let's say, 5 years or so of Circle Up's journey, it's hard to be a founder. It's hard to be a CEO, but it felt exhilarating. I felt like a missionary. This is not meant to be a joke or corny. This is the honest truth. When I drove to work and parked, I literally ran to work. I was excited. And that's the first 5 years. In 2016, 2017, and I detail this out in a blog on Medium, but I ran into some challenges that I did not handle as well as I could have. So we pivoted the business. To kind of summarize it, we pivoted the business. At the same time we were pivoting the business and shutting down a marketplace, we're launching a new business line. We also were raising a round for the parent company, large round for the parent company, and we were trying to raise our first venture fund. That was a lot to handle professionally at once. Concurrently, my wife and I were having major fertility issues, which was extremely difficult for us and emotional. And then I got diagnosed with cancer. I think those things together were not really what broke the back. It was how I responded to them. I've gotten 600 plus emails and 200 plus texts from people over the last couple of months about that blog I wrote. And what has been abundantly clear to me is that there are so many people, founders, CEOs, et cetera, that have had it much, much worse. And they wrote to say, like, look, what you wrote resonated with me. And by the way, I have brain cancer. And by the way, I lost a child. By the way, like really difficult things. I have always viewed myself as having a lot of grit. I think the people around me would say that I have the most grit they've ever seen. But what I didn't do well in those moments, or that time period, is about 18 months from 2016 to 2017, is I didn't open myself up to help from others. I thought I could grit it out by myself. And that was my fatal flaw. So look, I think if you're in this job long enough, you're in life long enough, you're going to come across periods where there's a perfect storm of a lot of different challenges at once. And there's a good chance it'll be harder than what I had to deal with. I think the learning for me, and I learned it too late, was I should have been open to help from others. And so what does that look like? First of all, I didn't talk to people about it. Professionally, the company knew what we were doing, but they had no idea about the fertility issues, the cancer issues. I kept that to myself. The board knew, but the company didn't. And that, I think, makes it harder to build trust with other people, relationships with other people, so that they can be there for you. I didn't tell many friends. Heck, I had majority of my extended family didn't know. It also makes it harder for them to support you, then be there for you. It also makes it harder for them to understand your journey, so that when you do look beaten down, depressed, like, they understand why. I didn't find a CEO group. I didn't find a therapist. I didn't find a management coach, all in time. Like, I just went through that period on my own, and that was the biggest professional mistake I've ever made. At the end of that period, one of our board members, Dan Saporin from Keenan, said, you should take a sabbatical, a 6-week sabbatical. And I didn't do it because that period was done and I was burnt out, but I'll bounce back because there's no one in the world that's got more grit than I do. No one in the world. And I didn't take the sabbatical. And from then on, like, every time I stubbed my toe, it felt like the weight of the world, because it was a mixture of burnout and depression and like the littlest things that I used to be able to deal with. That's not a big deal. Let's move on. Big deal. I couldn't deal with it anymore. That led to, the next 2 years, just every win I would not absorb. And every small loss was a big deal to me in my head. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And towards the end of 2019, my then 5-year-old daughter said, "Daddy, why do you always look so sad?" She said it a couple times, actually, over the course of a few weeks. And that was, a little bit of a wake-up call to say, like, I need to make a change. And so I wrote the board a long email, which is in that blog post I did on Medium, saying, I got to transition out. And so that's what I did in October of 2020.
It's amazing how much kids absorb and see and can identify and then present back to you.
It's scary and extremely valuable, but yeah, and it's special that I will always have that with her. One of the emails that I got after writing the blog post was from a company that does art and stationery, and this company had read my blog post, and it's a company that we had worked with before. And this company had read my blog post and said, and the company's called Heyday, or Our Heyday, excuse me. And the founders, Pat and Dot, reached out to me and said, we want to give you a gift, like, thank you for what you've built, and like, I think your story really touched us. And they sent me a print, and on it just says, "To love is to listen." And it's hanging in my wall. It's one of very few things that are hanging in my wall. And it's really special to me because it came from an entrepreneur. Going back to your question about like, did we have the impact? Like, we wanted to help entrepreneurs. And like, that was really special that entrepreneurs sent it. Particularly entrepreneurs that I don't know. Because I always wanted to help people that like, maybe they didn't know my name or I never met them, but like, we created something that helped other people that I didn't know. Meaning that's the scale of it. And it's special to me because like, it connects to what my daughter said, and that's what they meant it to connect with, which is like, she said something and I tried to listen and tried to make a change because of that.
I recently read something where, my favorite shirt says resilient. I have 3 of them. And so I think I understand the whole grit side. I read something recently where someone talks about resiliency as this ability to bounce back from the unexpected shocks. But they contrasted it with something called anti-fragile. And that's the ability, as they define it, to not just bounce back, but to bounce back bigger, better, more successfully. And it requires the preparation. It requires the network. It requires the coach and the CEO circle you got to have that foundation in place in order to be anti-fragile. And I'm kind of making this part up myself, but because I'm contrasting it with a different story that they were telling, but I completely understand, at least I think I do, where you're coming from. So first I want to say thank you for sharing that story. I know you've shared it already. I think it's always nice to hear the voice and rather than the voice that you put to it, which I think we all do when we read anyway. So I'm going to switch topics because I do love your tweet storms. And I'm going to move to the one that initiated this particular conversation. And I think you know it's coming. But you said that equity crowdfunding or equity investment marketplaces failed. Full stop. Didn't work. And I know that your thinking there pushed Circle Up in a different direction than your original vision. But I want to talk about that because I disagree with that. I agree with a lot of what you tweet about. I disagree with that.
Yeah. And I respect that. And I think there are a lot of people who disagree with me on that. I appreciate when people disagree and try and take emotion out of it and just like lay out their perspective, and ideally when that perspective or logic is based on facts. And a thing that I struggled with, and I'd love, for this conversation, I would want to shy away from mentioning specific platforms, but just talk about the industry overall, because I just never, ever want to criticize another startup. When one of the things that was difficult in that dialogue on Twitter is there are people that were saying, naming specific platforms and like, well, what about so-and-so? They worked with, pick a company that has a big logo that has not had an exit. And like, okay, they've worked with 1,000 companies. We're picking, I don't know what to do with that data. Like that means out of 1,000, they picked one that we've all heard of.
So I agree with your point about data, by the way. So I'd like us to, if you're okay with this, I want to focus on 2 pieces. One is, where is the data? Where's the reporting coming from these platforms? And I think that ties to your point about this long feedback loop. And it's one thing to ask people to, invest $10 or $100 on Kickstarter and receive some physical thing in return. You're right. It's another thing to ask people to invest $10,000, for some equity in company X. How many checks are they going to write? And, I wonder if, and I'm asking because, and this to me feels like this thread that's running through some of the statements. And that is that these platforms became sort of the the last resort of financing. And therefore, you've got bad selection as a result. Am I reading into that?
Well, so I made that point about a certain demographic of companies. I don't think that that's universal across all the platforms. I think if you tell me that there's a platform that's focused on, companies based in Africa, where the capital markets and the venture ecosystem is not nearly as robust as it is here, yeah, I totally buy that there's not adverse selection. But when the platforms that are supposedly taking companies from Y Combinator or, Silicon Valley, technology companies that are often really hard to understand, and they're going on an online platform, I think it's really hard for me in 2021 to believe that those companies did not already try and pitch 700 venture firms and 400 angels, and that they would rather have the money from, a dentist even if it's aggregated in some sort of like syndicate fashion in Ohio.
I want to push on that though. And I want to push on that because you have also written about and said, and this may lead to a different conversation, that you like it when that CEO or founder who thought he was going to die or she was going to die that year eventually succeeds. And sort of fascinated as well by, and I'm shorthanding this, the CEO who thinks she's all that, and that company fails. Point being,
I don't root for the second to fail. I'm just interested. I'm interested in the contrast.
Yeah. No, you're interested in the kind of. My point is, we don't know who's going to win, and we don't know who's going to lose.
Yeah.
And so just because Sandhill says no.
Yep.
That's kind of where I'm going. Just because totally Sandhill says no.
I think that's totally fair. I guess my belief. I think what's tricky, like I do believe the logic that if you pick any 1 or 5 venture funds or 10 venture funds, they are absolutely not infallible. And that decision process is not infallible. But the amount of just overwhelming capital in venture, particularly in 2021, where solo GPs are becoming a dime a dozen, and there's so many sources of capital, and there's so many sophisticated venture angels, like to get told no by all of them. Do I believe that there's some companies that exist that could end up being successful? Yes. Uber was an example, right? Uber got
Jason
told
Calacanis.
No. Yep. Got told no by 1,000, and that was an out there idea. Peloton was another example. Absolutely. But I believe that if the asset class, so without taking just cherry picking examples, if the asset class performed well, we would have evidence of that. We would have evidence of that, of overwhelming demand for the asset class from investors. By the way, institutional investors would be flocking into those sites if there was actually a return. There'd be demonstration of the returns themselves. For those of you who don't follow this industry closely, 8-9 years ago, when this industry started, there weren't a lot of hotter things over the past decade than crowdfunding. I mean, Bitcoin's hotter, but it's not a lot of them. And the first couple of years, the platforms would all put up unrealized IRRs on their website. Those are gone now. We're not seeing a lot of quotes about, but they do have IRR. They do know, but for some reason, they're not talking about it. So we're not seeing institutional investors flocking. We're not seeing a demonstration of this are our returns. We just see cherry-picked examples, the Ubers, the Pelotons, whatever. And that makes me wonder, is it working? I define working as it's scaling. It's helping a ton of entrepreneurs or a ton of investors. You can judge it by GMV. You can judge it by revenue. You can judge it by absolute returns on the platforms. I'm okay with a lot of different measures, but I'm not seeing any of the measurements as demonstrate that it's, quote, working.
So I think there were regulatory barriers to the eventual success of some of these platforms that have recently changed and go into effect actually 6 weeks from now on, I think, March 15th. You couldn't have the solo GPs, the solo capitalists, really participate on a Reg CF platform because there was only $1 million to go around. But if you have $5 million to go around, which there will be come March 15th, now you have enough room for some of the institutional money to flow in and to provide what I call signal as opposed to noise as to a quality company. Not to say that everything happens up until now is not quality. We raised money twice on 2 different platforms as a dogs eat the dog food sort of proof, right? Hey, we've integrated with X platform, and guess what? Now you can use us to raise money. And we're willing to let you invest in us as a result. So I'm biased, unquestionably, because they were both successful. But my point being is, I think the rules and the regulations have changed in such a way that institutional capital can now come in and help support some of this fundraising effort. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
First of all, I hope I'm wrong. I hope you are right. I hope the industry does well. I mean, I really do. Like, I'm not rooting against other folks. Like, I think it'd be great if it happened. You know, for the audience that has not spent time in this space, there are major regulatory barriers. Some of the ones you just talked about and others that we haven't talked about that just make it not only complex, but very opaque. Believe it or not, a lot of the rules are gray. I want to repeat that. The rules are gray. And when you ask lawyers, they'll tell you, we're not really sure. This is how we try to interpret it. And it's an amazing process to go through. And we can talk about why they're purposely gray. I'd love to do another hour on just that topic, but like they're gray and they're purposely gray. In the case, the point you just made that these regulatory changes will create a structural unlock to bring institutional investors in. Again, I hope you're right. My concern would be that the investors are trying to find deal flow all day long that is differentiated. The institutional investor that's going predominantly to an online platform, it's almost by definition not differentiated deal flow. And I wonder how they're going to talk about that to their LPs.
I think it works in reverse.
Okay, go ahead.
I think institutional investor says, okay, you have X type of company. Maybe it's a CPG company. Mm-hmm. I think this is a great company to raise money in addition to our $2 million check.
Oh, maybe.
I think you can raise $3 million with us as a name on it.
Right.
And sell it to your customer.
Yeah, I think, the customer thing, having done that in an industry that I would argue is probably the best industry to sell to your consumer. It didn't. The reality of that did not live up. Now you're about to say, well, what about if it's crowdfunding and there's smaller checks and more people? And yes, but there's a lot of complexity that comes with that. And it hasn't been shown to me. I hope I'm wrong. I wanted to see it happen. I just haven't seen anyone do that where like you can actually point to that crowd helping. Sam Adams did it 30 years ago. That date might be wrong. Probably is wrong. Ben and Jerry's did it, believe it or not. Did different versions of this. I think the old story was that Sam Adams put a tag around their beer bottles. And both, I actually talked to Jerry from Ben and Jerry's about them doing it. And he said, and I think the founder of Sam Adams, they both said that there was something special about that. I want to see it, frankly. So I don't think I said it'll never work. I think I said it has failed. And I don't yet see enough. I don't see proof points of it having a path to success. I understand the logic of the regulatory changes helping to spur it. Not convinced yet, and I'd like to be convinced with the data. Yeah,
and to be clear, I don't think you said it would never work. I think you said it failed also. So I agree with that. And I think there's this other. Did you read Fred Wilson's blog this morning?
No, not this morning. I often read it.
So he was talking about what's been happening with GameStop and AMC and Wall Street Bets, and because he was getting a lot of questions about it, and he wrote a line, and I'm going to totally get it wrong, but I think conceptually we'll be in the right direction, is that the regulations were written to protect orphans and widows. Now, he was being tongue in cheek because that's what the regulators tell us. And he was making a broader point that it's really what these rules and regulations enable is for the rich to stay rich or get richer, and for others not to have the opportunity to. And so, to a certain degree, people look at the average American and say the average American is not smart enough to invest in private companies, private opportunities, alternative assets. And the other side of that coin is an assumption that it's safe to invest in the public markets.
Right, which is insane.
It's totally insane because if you look at since 1926, when the stock market was created, 25 out of 26,000 companies account for 30+% of all the returns in the market. 4% in total of the 26,000 companies account for all of the return, which means 96% are a push at best. The average public company return since 1926, negative 100%. And so for me, when I think about what we're doing with retirement savings and helping people invest for the future, this idea that stock market returns are risk-free and the market's only going to go up is a myth. I mean, and people say, oh, but the US, it only goes up and et cetera. I mean,
yeah, I agree with you. You don't need to convince me. I'm on board with that. I'm also on board that the regulatory landscape for private investing is antiquated and should change. I'm just not convinced that the impact of that change will be as great as some advocates think, but I believe it should change. I think it's absolutely wrong that I could put 100% of my money in Chipotle, but I can't put it into a great startup.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think anyone should put 100% of their money into venture. I think it's 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%. And part of what we're trying to do is provide access to all of those 10% to those buckets. So what's next? What's next for you? And what does your daughter say to you when she sees you now?
Yesterday, she said, can we do a project? And she wants to build a musical instrument. So I spend a lot of time with the kids right now, which is awesome, frankly. I'm not sure what's next. I've read a lot of books on making a transition healthy, talked to probably 15 plus CEOs, founders that have made that transition about what they've learned. And the common theme is you need to just take time and do nothing. And William Bridges, in his book, Transitions, calls it living in the nothingness, being comfortable saying, I don't know, when someone asks you. And that's where I am. I think I need to be comfortable, for some period of time, just saying, I'm not sure. Because without that, and without going through the period of nothingness, it's hard to make a healthy transition. It's hard to decompress, to get back to a mind space where you're able to be creative, where you're able to imagine yourself climbing another mountain. And so the last couple of months for me have been amazing, absolutely amazing. I've been doing a lot of writing, some of which I put out, a lot of it I haven't, and spending time with my family. But like right now, my answer to what I'm doing next is I don't know. It's hard, frankly, Eric. I won't hide that I'm fairly insecure about that.
Can I push on that for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Why are you insecure about that?
Every single CEO that I talk to, every single CEO, including, I talked to a CEO of a Fortune 25 company that made the transition. I talked to a founder that started a company, sold it for a couple billion, and CEOs that started it and didn't go anywhere. Every single one said they were insecure at the start of the process. Some of them were willing to admit it then, some of them weren't. They all told me now. Interestingly, I went on a very long 3-hour walk last week with a really prominent investor who made a similar transition, let's say 5-6 years ago. And he said when he made the transition, he talked to the CEOs of, and if you pick 10 largest technology companies that have changed CEOs, talk to those CEOs. Every single one of them said that they felt insecure about not being able to say what they were doing next. And all of them, everyone that I'm mentioning now has a similar explanation, which is like, I'm worried I'll become irrelevant in 6 months. I'm worried that the calls that I have gotten calls in the last 3 months, investing calls and operating calls. And some of them are amazing. And I'm worried that they won't keep coming. And that insecurity I have found to be extremely common. And in talking with these other CEOs, it has helped to normalize that for me and made this a much healthier thing. Because I remind myself, okay, if these 5 people were insecure about that, it's just part of the drill. Because look, like the call, you used to be in the information flow a lot more as a CEO than I am now. And like, you're worried that the world will move on without you. And it's funny, one CEO said it, I thought, in a painfully accurate way. But it really hurt when this person said it. And then I thought about it, I'm like, I think that's right, which was, the world doesn't care about you, Ryan. You're not Elon Musk and you're not Jeff Bezos, and there's probably 5 other people the world cares about. The world does not care about you. The world is going to move on. It already moved on. But the good news is that when you're ready, what you've done will stand for itself and you can come back in. But that is true of almost everyone. And there's something liberating about that, which, allowed me to not panic of like, I got to take something. I got to do something. I got to have an answer to what are you going to do? It just allowed me to just like relax. Let's just figure out my own journey. And when I'm ready, I'll take the next step on it.
Well, Ryan, whatever that next step is, I can tell you that the steps that have led up to it have impacted a lot of people. And I hope you take that away. And I hope you feel good about that. And I want to thank you for spending this time with us and being on the show. And I just really appreciate you and everything that you have done up until now. And I'm looking forward to seeing what's next.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
The Altogether Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto knows that the public markets offer insufficient diversification of retirement accounts. That's why Alto developed a streamlined platform to make it easy and cost-effective for anyone to invest their tax-advantaged retirement savings in alternatives. Assets like real estate, VC, and crypto that are outside of the public markets and available through Alto's 21 platform partners. To learn more, visit altoira.com.